Alright, it's time for another mega review of a franchise, this time Spy Kids. Now, Spy Kids is known for containing some 3D entries that are notorious for various reasons, but we're going to take a look at the whole timeline. It started in 2001 with the original Spy Kids. This Blu-ray I have here, a Canadian edition, and it has a reversible cover so you can have it English or French. Now it was about a brother and sister, Carmen and Junie, who had parents that they didn't know were secretly spies, field spies back in the day, and eventually quit field work for the time being to raise their kids, still working on other projects. And it starts out with a great opening scene that shows their story in the form of a bedtime story. This was a relatively low budget movie, and a surprise hit. And what I believe made it a hit was not only its inventiveness, visual and story-wise, but also its timelessness. It was a pretty basic, timeless story. The characters were well written. It had a good message about the family sticking together, looking out for each other, and it besides the fantastical elements, because it did have some bizarre fantastical elements, it also at the same time was pretty grounded. It was also filmed on film, edited optically, and you can tell, of course, there's shortcomings to that process, but also has a certain charm to it. Now, just a tidbit about the flow of this movie. If you're used to the original theatrical version and the DVD version, it's changed for the Blu-ray. They changed a scene that was originally shorter in the original version because they didn't have the budget for it. Um, Actually, thought it kind of worked better in the original because the flow was better. It was when they were scuba diving and the water was warm, and he said, "Oh, I peed," but in the director's cut, which is on the Blu-ray, there's a whole scene with cartoonish CGI sharks that are sleeping, and it seems a little bit more of a road bump to the flow of the plot. So it is what it is. But yeah, that threw me off guard when I got to that part because, whoa, what's this? So anyway, that was in 2001, and then, of course, being the hit that it was, 2002, got the sequel, Spy Kids 2, The Island of Lost Dreams. Now, from the very beginning, you'll notice that the visual style takes a marked turn for the whole rest of the series. In fact, for Robert Rodriguez kids' movies in general, they started to be filmed digitally, which makes for easier editing, but there's also lots more green screen and CGI, and that's not a bad thing, obviously, but it's done very cartoonishly. So there's no attempt at making realistic lighting. Lots of low-level CGI that was kind of behind the times even then when it was made. And the first movie had the villain, Floop, turn out to change to be good in the end, and this was kind of innovative. But it turns out this is going to be a running theme in these movies in general, about there is no real bad guy, and you'll see that continuing to manifest itself. The bizarre part here is that the character Minion, who turned out to be the real bad guy in the first movie, he continues to be part of this family, so-called, and he's trusted. So it doesn't really make sense who someone with that character would continue to be trusted. I'm not sure that's the best lesson to teach kids. And now that brings us to the third entry, Spy Kids 3D, Game Over. This was something. This was released in 2003. The next year after that, in Anaglyph 3D, red and blue glasses, because this was before digital 3D started to be installed throughout the world. The first wide release in Real D 3D and other digital 3D formats was Chicken Little in 2005. So this was over 2 years before that. And they would include these red and blue glasses at the theater, and also include it with the DVD that I just showed you. Um, and the 2D version was called Spy Kids 3. In 2012, they did release a true Blu-ray 3D edition. Um, I got it for, I forget, $15 or less. Um, and then it became just super rare. I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't print too many. I don't know. But it's very rare. Sells for over $100 when it's brand new, or sometimes when it's used. So how did the 3D in this turn out? It's a little bit nuanced. Let's take a look. First of all, there's very interesting opening titles with paper cutouts, which is kind of appropriate. And during the logos and the opening titles, you'll notice that the parallax for this is wide set. I mean, you've got plunging deep backgrounds, sometimes things just shooting out of the screen, crazy amounts. No worries about window violations at all. And that's not a bad thing. It's very immersive. But what's kind of good about that is that this was made in anaglyph, and anaglyph has less nuance than digital 3D. You can't, you don't. It's harder to perceive the finer aspects, especially on lower grade 3D with less parallax, because these harsh colors are so distracting. So you kind of do need that stronger depth with anaglyph so that it punches you in the face and you actually know what you're seeing. And also, just the whole idea at this time period was that 3D was an event. Nowadays, the aim is more towards being natural, um, being something you don't focus on perhaps as much. Like there's 4K, there's surround sound, there's various frame rates at times. But the public consciousness, especially at this time, still to some degree, is that 3D is an event only suited for certain genres, and you're supposed to get your money's worth. It's like a ride, basically. So at the beginning, there's an introduction by Floop telling you how you'll be taking off your glasses and putting them on a couple times. So besides the couple minutes of the 3D intro, and then a 10-minute span or so of 2D, and then the rest of the movie is in 3D basically, except for a few minutes at the end. And when it does kick into 3D again, it's super powerful. No holds barred. And also, again, the CGI is not of the highest quality, but in the context of this movie being in a video game, it kind of works. So I would say it's less distracting than, for instance, it was in the Island of Lost Dreams, in which they were supposed to be on a real island with real creatures, where the lighting just didn't hold up. That looked like a video game, but wasn't supposed to be. This is supposed to be, so it kind of works. So just because it has a lot of strong 3D doesn't mean it's all good. In fact, there's a lot, a lot of stereo errors. I mean, like most of it. Now, again, I can't blame them. They did say that they used off-the-shelf software for a lot of this movie. And it's not like there was a big pipeline or industry for 3D at this point. So no doubt a lot of it was done just by eyeballing it. Yeah, twin camera rig, editing those streams independently, capturing different and shifting layers in the computer graphics to get a 3D image. So you can understand how errors would work in. It's a little more than I would hope for. I'm not talking about simple reversal of left, right, left. I mean, where most of the shot you can tell it's proper 3D, but elements within it will be improper. Like this silver is supposed to be in front of Junie, obviously, and it's slightly behind him, so he sort of bleeds around the edges of it. And this same basic thing happens consistently in much of the movie, over half the shots at the very least, of one or more elements within the composition being placed at the wrong depth and bleeding around an object that's supposed to be in front of it but was placed slightly behind it. Sometimes even the background, like the starry sky, was placed too far ahead and would bleed around the objects in the foreground. there was one shot I'd noticed that did actually do a simple accidental reversal of just being inverted depth, and then a couple adjacent shots that had an unusual error of the frames being off, like one eye was delayed behind the other. So that introduced, of course, major discrepancies such as vertical parallax in Junie's shot, and in the fast-moving shot of the robot, some completely looking different frames because they were changing so fast in connection with each other. But that being said, by and large, this is a very fun 3D film. It's, in my opinion, an essential part of a 3D collection. It's an important part of 3D film history. Despite the errors, there's still a lot of very strong, eye-popping 3D throughout. That's purposefully so. The scene of surfing on the lava was just really immersive, especially if you watch it on a projector, where they bring out the glasses to help the characters see these video game characters that had transferred into the real world, and they use those same style of glasses that the audience would be using when they're watching an anaglyph, which was a cool way to bring the audience into the story, basically. And naturally, what you must have in a Part 3 in 3D is this 3D text. Gotta have that. Like I said, this came to Anaglyph 3D DVD, and it had some interesting things on the disc, like a comparison of analog video inputs that were common at the time, from coaxial, the lowest quality, to component, highest quality. Of course, that's not really a big deal nowadays that we just use HDMI, even for DVDs. And they even had a section where you could order more 3D glasses and give you a phone number or website. The menu was in Anaglyph 3D. It also had a video game, a very simple game that you could play on the DVD menu. This was in 3D on the 3D disc and in 2D on the 2D disc. It also had bonus material that mentioned some of the history of 3D, like showing the stereoscope, stereo cards, the arrival of the train in 3D. You'll also see Jeff Joseph, who, along with Bob Furmanek of the 3D Film Archive, established a fund for preserving lost original 3D films. It showed how Robert Rodriguez would play with his kids often, and part of that play was actually making home movies, and I do mean home movies, with editing and simple editing, simple storylines, test for his theatrical films. And this concept will really come into play later, which we'll get to. But he also did some tests with, because they had these layers from green screen usage with the last Spy Kids movie, it showed that they had done some tests with footage from Spy Kids 2 on making a 3D movie, and which eventually led into Spy Kids 3D. And another interesting part about the green screens is that because Junie was the most prominent character, Carmen wasn't in it as much, secondary sort of, and the parents were barely in it. They came towards the end, along with cameos of the other characters. They all couldn't coordinate their schedules, so when they were all together in the so-called real world, they were in front of a green screen, and did it in sections, which were later pieced together. Now, as for the story, I thought it was very fun. It's not an art film. It's not a masterpiece, but the basic story of this video game trapping kids and trying to make it to beat the game. It's just an interesting, engaging story. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's a fun ride. That being said, against that problematic part regarding the character development of, for instance, Donegan, who was a prominent member of the OSS, their spy organization. He was rescued in the first movie, and then the second movie he's betrays them, which was kind of bizarre. Then suddenly in this movie he's trusted again. And then Felix, who posed as their uncle in the first movie, then they found out he was just another spy. In the end of 3, he also commits betrayal. And then all of a sudden it's all good. And then naturally, as we've come to expect at this point, the villain isn't really a villain after all. So it's just, you can't take this stuff seriously. Um, it's really questionable uh, character development. So anyway, 2 years after that, in 2005, came another movie. It's not a Spy Kids movie per se, but I'm going to include it here because it's basically part of the family. It's The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lavagirl in 3D. This had a production very similar to Spy Kids 3D, the same look, the same vibe. Now, typically with movies, for instance, you'd see the words "a Robert Rodriguez film" because the first one was made on film. But it's taken figuratively, but he took it literally. And with Spy Kids 3D, he called it a Robert Rodriguez digital file because it was filmed digitally. That was less common at that time. Nowadays, it's prolific. Sharkboy and Lava Girl was, of course, also digital, but this time he called it a Rodriguez family movie. Not a family movie, but a Rodriguez family movie. Because this time he leaned into having his kids part of the production. In fact, his son is listed as a co-writer. How often do you get that? A child uh, listed as the writer of a major theatrical film. So, despite not being the greatest movies, that's kind of a fun aspect of these. You get very much the impression that these are somebody's living room pretends that just happen to be on the big screen. It reminds me of when I was little and I would draw in notebooks. I'd draw all these wild imaginative pictures, and I'd do it so fast just to get those ideas out, get them on paper. Um, that's kind of the impression you get here. These movies, despite being major releases, were relatively low budget, and Robert Rodriguez was very open about that, proud of it, in fact. He would do just what he needed to do to get that general impression on screen, cut corners. This movie also has a little bit of switching going on. You got a 5 minute intro or so in 3D, then you got 15 minutes or so of 2D, and then the rest of the movie pretty much in 3D. And like I said, being written by a father and a son, you very much get the feel that this is a pretend that's making it up as they go along, with a few key plot elements to give it some sort of structure. There's a very loose flow to the story and a randomness and a sure, why not attitude. Stuff that only a child with a fresh perspective could really make up. And you know what? I can't even say I fully understand it. But it's, again, it's fun. Definitely fun in 3D. Lava Girl's costume is pretty cool that it works in 3D, the inlets of lava in the creases in the costume. There's some rivalries throughout of lighting being different in either eye, either darker or lighter. I wouldn't say that works as well. And again, you've got the villain being not a villain after all at the end. So this one did not do well at the box office. And then it was quite some time for Spy Kids to return. In 2011, they made a new movie with new kids, Spy Kids, All the Time in the World. Now this was a 3D movie, but it wasn't filmed in 3D like his previous efforts. I'm not sure if he'll ever do that again. I'm sure it was a lot of work. And he had his own proprietary process, I'm sure, due to the amount of errors. So I'm not sure he's going to go back to that, nor probably should he, unless he were to adapt more recent methods. But anyway, this one was a conversion, and being 2011, it was an early conversion. So not only was it faint for the most part and inconsistent, but also a lot of errors. Some simpler shots work. Some shots where you can't hide the errors, like in bright light or with significant background detail, you can clearly see the rotoscoping errors, either cutting out part of people's faces or having part of the background bleed in the front. And hair is notorious for not being good in these early conversions. very uh, simplistic cutouts of the hair that doesn't look realistic. Reflections, which are more complex, of course, don't work well. Even some shots that you would think would work well just did not look good. They have a degree of depth, but it in some cases just looked like an auto convert, like it was given a general warping shape without any layer separation. And some things you would think look well, like pointing, or even this shot with the fist in the foreground, just did not translate fully into 3D. There was some depth to it, but that fist was not coming out of the screen like it should have. And I would have thought that would have been a relatively easy shot to do even back then. But simpler shots sometimes did do better, um, where they looked clean enough, no noticeable errors. But the shots that did shine were naturally the ones that they could do in real 3D, such as the computer animation, such as in the titling and special effects shots, as well as green screen shots, because then you've got layers that you can manually shift to make stronger and accurate 3D. All in all, I would say that I would still prefer to watch the 3D version. It had enough decent 3D in there to make it worth it, and it's still of interest to me, regardless. I can understand a casual viewer just want to see a clean version, watch the 2D version, sure, but I still find it interesting. And an interesting thing about this movie is, yes, it was 3D, but it was theatrically, it was advertised as 4D. Yes, it was aromascope. So you'd have 3D visuals, plus when the number flashes on the screen, you would scratch and sniff. Now, I saved this from the theater, but they may have sold Aromascope Blu-ray 3Ds in some part of the world. I didn't look into it, but the US version, at least, does not have that. It doesn't have an option in the settings either to have the numbers flash on the screen, which is unfortunate. The DVD may have, again, I'm not sure. And it also has that annoying trend at the time they would say includes bonus 3D version, as if the 3D is just an afterthought. They did the same thing with the Lego movie. So like I said earlier, the first Spy Kids movie had that well-developed theme of family and taking care of each other, stuff like that. Sibling rivalry, honesty, all that stuff. And this general theme of family was continued throughout the movies, but by the time it got to the third movie, it was sort of like a bland stereotype. It was just a word that was thrown out there without much depth or development to it. And in fact, the third movie in general, while fun, still was almost a parody of itself at that point. It was kind of cracking fun at itself from like a meta perspective. So it didn't have that grounded quality that only the first movie had. Now, All the Time in the World also continues that family theme, but with the plot being of a step parent. And interestingly, in between that time period during Robert Rodriguez's success, what does he do? He cheats on his wife with a star in one of his movies. So yeah, after all that working directly with his wife and kids on these movies and preaching about families sticking together, they get a divorce. So I'm not sure if that maybe influenced the plot direction of Spy Kids 4. But in any case, it was pretty much downhill from there and never would return to the success of the original. In 2018, there was a Netflix series called Spy Kids Mission Critical Computer Animation. As to where it takes place in the timeline, Carmen is supposed to be about 14 in the series. So I guess that would place it. She was 12 in Spy Kids 2. So that would make her 13 in Spy Kids 3 if it took place according to real world time passage. Maybe after the third movie. So which would be in between 3 and 4. If it follows the original chronology at all. Which it may not be, because there might have been some inconsistencies, so it just might be a separate continuity that doesn't take itself seriously. And honestly, I couldn't take it seriously either. I found it rather annoying and grating. So, yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that. Then a couple years later in 2020, again for Netflix, Robert Rodriguez made We Can Be Heroes. Now this is interesting because it seems to have a foot in both universes of Spy Kids and Sharkboy and Lavagirl. It's got the president that was seen in Spy Kids 2, and he's the president here. That does raise the question, how is he still president unless he served one term and uh, then served another term later on? The only difference here is that they made his hair blonde for some reason and made him of questionable character. So as being made in 2020, I think it's kind of obvious they were trying to make some brave political statement by having him resemble perhaps someone else. And they also had a line in there saying, "How did this guy ever get to be president? He can't even put two sentences together." Um, I guess that was supposed to be a dig, but I'm not sure how well that aged after the next election. But yeah, I won't get into that. But as for Sharkboy and Lava Girl, they're actually secondary characters in this movie. Um, the actress returned, and Taylor Lautner didn't return. He was recast, but they didn't really give him speaking lines, and he always had his mask on the whole time. And they had a daughter, so apparently, and this daughter has superpowers as well. And the stars of this movie really are a bunch of children uh, that have different abilities, and they work together to save the day. And actually, I didn't expect much from this, but I actually enjoyed it. I thought this was pretty well done. It was a lot of fun. And here's the funny part. I was binging this franchise, and I had no idea that a new Spy Kids movie was being made for Netflix. That came as a complete surprise, and it was coming right up in September 2023. I had no idea. So it was kind of perfect timing. Now, this one has a very similar visual style, a lot of green screen work and uh, lower budget CGI, but being 2023, it still is better than all the past entries. So it has better lighting, a little bit better CGI. And this doesn't feel as much like a sequel. It doesn't go back into lore or bring back old characters, really. Um, this feels more like a remake, reboot type situation. A lot of the elements are reused, like from the original film, the whole plot of the parents being spies and their kids didn't know. The concept of going to a safe house, being attacked in their own home, and when at that safe house using their long names as a password. It also borrowed elements from the other movies, though, like the skeletons and the crab bot, um, which were similar of Spy Kids 2. And then, of course, the major plot element in this film was a video game. And naturally, that equates directly to Spy Kids 3D, including the concept of going into the video game with these outlandish costumes, which they did in the movie's conclusion, as well as like the city chase sequence from Spy Kids All the Time in the World. That was also visually similar to what went on here. So this was probably my least favorite of the entire filmography. Well, not probably, it is definitely easily. It felt like they reused these elements, but none of them worked like they did originally. It just felt very by rote. I wouldn't say the casting or direction was great. Um, Characters didn't have the same charm. A little bit of overacting going on, even more so, believe it or not. So while the visuals was the only thing that saw an uptick in quality, everything else was just, I found personally, pretty bland. And of course, at this point, we already knew what was going to happen with the bad guy. It's not really bad. This general theme of relativism. There was even a line in there about not sending a person to prison that won't make him a better person, as if that's the sole reason prison exists. Yeah, it's nothing to do with protecting the public. It's just to reform. So yeah, there's that questionable moral theme that started with the first movie and just amplified to really naive proportions through the rest of the series. Culminates in this last one. So anyway, I've kept you long enough. That is my review of the Spy Kids franchise. Check it out if you can. If you can snag one of those Blu-rays, they're pretty rare. See you next time.